So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Heather. I will just say there is a little hand raise icon. If you do have questions during her chat, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand and we'll try and answer those. If you don't have the ability to turn your microphone on, you are able to just pop questions into the chat and I will keep an eye on that. So, and pass those along to her. So Heather, thank you.
Well, thank you, Abby, and thanks for everyone joining us today. Andrew and I are pretty excited to do this video series over the next couple of months, several months, I guess you could say. And just by way of housekeeping, I want to thank Abby and the Department of Health for their support and partnership on this. They're hosting the back end for us throughout these talks, and we couldn't do it without them. I also want to thank all of TFND's partners. Many of you are our partners, and we appreciate your support and help too, and it allows us to do opportunities like this. For today, I am going to keep this fairly relaxed and informal. Abby told you how you can ask questions. You do not have to hold them till the end. You can ask them during, and we can interject and discuss things as we go along. My plan for today is to kind of talk through a presentation that I have been using for the past several years. It's been updated a number of times. It was originally developed for a quarterly partners meeting. Jordan Schaefbauer of Bismarck Early Public Health and I collaborated to do a Train the Trainers series. And Jordan actually initially put this youth presentation together, and then I put an adult presentation together. And then we talked about how there are differences between talking to kids or youth and talking to adults. And this is just a good refresher course. So some of you might have seen this information before. That's okay. There are some updates that have occurred in the past several years. And so a few of the slides have been adjusted or look different than they did before. These are things that you might already be talking about. And then we can hopefully give you a couple of maybe different ideas on how to say them or how to utilize them as you're going into schools or going into your communities. And so just know that this is a fairly basic level presentation. It's not going to be totally brand new to many of you, and that's okay. I think it's always good for us to have refreshers and to talk about why we do the things that we do. And so just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we go through. So my plan is to show you the presentation that I have been using and talk through the different slides and what I say and how I say it, and in some cases why I say it. And then at the end, we'll talk about some of the kind of pitfalls that we can fall into if I haven't covered them during the presentation, and we can ask even more questions if you've not asked during the presentation, if you've held anything to the end. I'll try and leave us a chunk of time so that we can have some good back and forth discussion, or if you have ideas to offer up to the group. This by no means is all inclusive, just what Heather thinks day. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have those kind of days? But I'm curious to hear from you. I always learn so much from this group and from you and what you do as the boots on the ground. And so you can always offer up suggestions and ideas at the end too, if there's something that hasn't been covered that you're doing that you see working in your communities or in your schools. I'd be interested to hear that. So that being said, I'm going to share my screen now, or attempt to share my screen here, and get us started on going through the presentation as I use it. Okay, can we see my screen? I'm getting a head nod. Okay, excellent. So this is the presentation that was developed. I want to say it's been almost 4 years, 3.5, 4 years ago. It's super effective. Thanks again, Jordan. I don't know if you're on today, but if you are, thank you. This has always been great for being able to have a kind of a go-to that's adaptable. I know many of you have adapted this and used it, and so hopefully you maybe pick up just a couple of new tips and tricks as we go through today. But how we talk to kids is a bit different than we talk to adults. We cover certain aspects at a different level, and some aspects we leave out. For instance, we're not going to give them ideas on how to get products or where to get products or using stealth products as a for instance. But we do want to make them aware of things that they can be exposed to and what they need to know about the addiction side of things and how dangerous it can be. And so when we talk about exposed, we're talking about exposing the tobacco industry and exposing, big tobacco, the industry. I'll kind of explain some of those terms to the kids as I share these opening slides so that they know what we're exposing and that we're trying to keep them from being tricked into a lifelong addiction. If one thing speaks to kids from what I have seen is that they really don't like to be manipulated or tricked or feel like that they're being backed into a corner on something. So this is where we try and keep it a little bit interactive. And there are a few things that we do throughout this presentation to either get the kids up and moving because it's hard for them to sit through. Some of this needs to be adapted based on the amount of time that you have. Sometimes you might be invited in for 25 minutes. Sometimes you might get all the way up to 50 minutes, depending on if you're going into a class or if you're at an assembly or if you're being hosted by maybe an after school group like a SAD chapter or a church group. So you might have to adapt some of the activities that are in this presentation or that we do throughout based simply on time. But this one I always kind of go through kind of as an icebreaker. I'll have the kids raise your hand if you know someone who smokes or vapes. All the hands go up almost always. Someone who chews, kind of middle of the road, half the hands will go up. And then if you've seen advertising for tobacco, and all the hands will go up in that instance as well. And so, usually the kids at this point will look around the room a little bit. They'll see who's raising hands, who's not raising hands. Like I said, it's kind of a good icebreaker to get them involved right off the bat. And this is where we talk about the advertising piece of it all. So Big Tobacco spends a lot of money every year. Something I like to point out specifically because it really relates to kids is this graphic on the side here featuring McDonald's and Starbucks. And I'll point out, these tiny little columns are McDonald's and Starbucks. Who here feels like they see McDonald's and Starbucks everywhere? Depending on where you are, there might be like 2 or 3 or 4 in your community of each kind. And now look at the middle column and how huge it is. Well, no wonder we see advertising everywhere. And then a lot of times I get invited into our more rural communities, and so I'm in smaller schools. And so a way I could kind of hit this home to them is based on the size of my group. Sometimes I only have 20, 30, 50 kids in the room, and I'll say, who here would like $1 million? Well, the industry is spending $37 million a year just in our state. Everybody here could have $1 million today. Isn't that crazy to think about? And really trying to relate it back to them so that they have a way to process it. And this works particularly well with young kids, in that 5, 6, 7, 8th grade range. The older they get, a little bit more jaded they seem to get. And so it doesn't always translate as impactfully to the older crowd, but I still see some wheels turning sometimes on that. So here's where we talk about the toll of tobacco, and we use some of the statistics that I talk about personally all the time with our legislators. I'll sometimes tell them that. So if you're working with policymakers in your community, here's some of the stats that we use when we talk to them. The 1,000 adults that die from every year from their own smoking. I do a lot of times mention that in 2019, my dad was one. And so it can be very personal when it's one of your own family that are being affected by tobacco use. And sometimes that will resonate with some of the kids in class. 14,000 kids will die prematurely, and that's more than all the kids in Bismarck Public Schools. And depending on the school system you're in, that can be kind of an eye popper as well for them to think about every kid in their school, every kid in all the schools in their town being affected. So here's another kind of more interactive slide that I like to ask some questions on. We talk about, again, why they're seeing this advertising everywhere. And here's where it really can relate back to them on a more personal level. And so we'll talk about, when you walk into a gas station, what do you see? Do you see things located, in areas that maybe are easy for you to specifically notice? Are they at your eye level? Are they next to candy? I know they're not supposed to be. And so we'll talk about product placement. We'll talk about flavors. And I only touch very briefly on flavors here because we do a segment on that later in this presentation. Video games, I'll do a raise your hand again. All right, who in the room are gamers? Do we have any gamers in the house? And usually about, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the boys' hands will go up, sometimes a couple of girls, and then we'll talk about, well, have you ever seen your avatar or character smoking inside your game? That's advertising. That's to make it seem more normal to you. You might not think of it as advertising, but tobacco companies sometimes will pay sponsorships to be included in gaming venues or in games themselves. And then we talk about social media. I'll say, all right, who here has Snap? Who here has Instagram? Who here has anything I haven't heard of? I mean, you guys are the social media experts. Tell me what you're using. Have you guys ever seen any influencers or vloggers or people using these products online? Sometimes they're being paid money to do that and sell to you. And it doesn't seem like advertising, but really they're a paid sponsor and they're showing off these products for a reason. Same thing with celebrities. And then we'll have a little discussion on that. Movies, I'll try and think of a couple movies that they've seen. This is Lord of the Rings, and I'll ask if they've, seen anything on Netflix, and I'll talk about, the Netflix campaign to get smoking out of shows and try and resonate it back to them in that fashion too. So this is where we do a game if there's time. So this is again one of those adaptable pieces, and I'm going to pull up the one that I typically like to use. If I can find where it went. Uh-oh, did it close on me? So there is a matching game that I'm going to have to try and find because I had it open and now it looks like it's closed. So it's a find your match game, and basically we have printouts of different flavored products or candy products, coffee drinks, and then a tobacco match. And so the industry is great at copying what this all looks like. And so having these examples for the kids and letting them know why the industry is doing this can be a key component. Plus, it gets them up and moving around. The more you can do that with kids, the more you can involve them and have youth participate and think for themselves and talk through some of these things, the more invested they become and the better they seem to pay attention, especially in that junior high, early high school age range. And so this finder match will usually break up into either small groups or pairs, and we'll pass out the matching cards. And then if you have a small enough class, you can do one per kid, but a lot of times it's larger groups that you're in front of. And so you'll pass these out and then you'll have them find their person. And so it's usually a couple minutes of controlled chaos. And then it becomes back to normal. And then we'll get up front and we'll talk through. Oh, and I just totally messed up my slides. We'll talk through what the matches are, why they're a match, how they're looking at these products in terms of the industry wants you to be familiar with the flavors. They want you to think that it's like candy so that it's safer or safe. And then we'll talk about some of the ones that they might have seen at convenience stores or out in the real world and just see what they're familiar with. And I'll provide all of these materials at the end, and I'll include that matching game for you to be able to utilize. And if I can pull it up at the end when we're doing our Q&A to show us an example on the screen, I will. Sorry that one got closed on us. So that kind of culminates into this question, and this is always a little bit of a more sobering graphic, and some kids will figure it out right away, and some kids will be kind of confused as to why there are feet on the screen, but why does the industry target youth? And this is another great conversation starter for the group, and you'll get a wide variety of answers, and a couple in particular I want to address because not everybody gets to this final answer right away. And so a lot of times, why do the industry target youth? They'll say, well, the money. Well, yes, of course, there are billions of dollars on the line. They want your money. They'll say they want you to become addicted. Yes, that's part of the point of why we're visiting today too. They do want you to become addicted to this product and use it forever. Inevitably, there's always or almost always one kid that will say, because we're dumb, because we're stupid, kids are dumb. And I always pause at that point and correct them and say, no, you are not dumb. You just haven't been given the information yet. And the industry wants to get to you before you get this information so that you don't know how to make an informed decision, so that you don't have a good choice to look at the options for. And so I think that helps get us a little bit of respect if we can kind of help them understand that they're not stupid, they're not dumb, they just don't have the information yet. And that's why we're here today talking with them. And I think that that always goes over pretty well. And then ultimately, why does the industry target youth? Because their customers die. The products kill people, the products make people sick, and they have to replace them. And that leads us into being able to talk about the Not a Replacement community program, another a replacement community or school idea that is featured later in the presentation. And so I think that this is kind of another good key moment where you can get down to their level and let them kind of figure out for themselves why it is that they're being targeted for these products. So then we talk through kind of some of the basics of the nicotine, the addiction itself, how it's used as a pesticide in some countries, how it's mainly from plants, how it's very, very fast in getting to your brain, 10 seconds in some cases, and how it really, lights up the parts of the brain, those dopamine receptors, and those pleasure centers of your brain that it activates, and how it makes changes to your prefrontal cortex and the decision making parts of your brain, and how brains really aren't done growing until you're in your mid 20s. And I think that that sometimes is surprising to people. It's a fact I didn't know until I started this job 5 years ago. And so I think that that's another good way to get them thinking about what the consequences really can be. And then I really try and dig deep into this, what happens to your body because of nicotine. And I keep these on the slide, but I always try and relate it back to the kids. So, to your body, it makes it harder to drive at night. And so I'll ask the question, well, who here are hunters? We got any hunters in the room? And they'll raise their hands, and I'll say, well, your eyesight is pretty important at dawn and dusk if you're going to be out hunting and trying to fill your tags. And then causing blood vessels to constrict, less nutrients brought to wounds, longer to heal. I'll be like, all right, got any athletes in the room? Who here is really into sports? Well, this is going to make it harder for you to perform at your peak levels. You are going to have a harder time breathing. You're going to have a harder time keeping up because just your blood flow isn't going to be taking oxygen to your lungs as quickly. Your blood flow isn't going to be taking nutrients around your body. If you get injured, you might be out for the whole season versus a few weeks, just because your body is going to have a harder time healing if you have a lot of nicotine in your system all the time. And then, causing your blood pressure to rise can exasperate or make things harder for you too. And so we'll talk about those types of things, but relating it back to hunting or athletics or things that kids in particular care about, I think is another good way to get them thinking about the cause and effect of all of this. So then this slide, we show kind of a wide variety of products. And this is one of the few slides that actually shows a lot of products other than our matching game. And you can see the Sour Dream. That's one of the things in the matching game because it looks just like Sour Patch Kids. And so again, we'll kind of talk back around how, all of these products are nicotine products and tobacco products. And I'll try and really point out that, and I'll tell them, I said, the reason I show this slide, or the reason this slide is in here, is because tobacco is tobacco is tobacco. These things are all harmful products. Switching one out for another isn't going to be helpful. Cigarettes, we have known for a long, long time, are very, very bad. But really, these other products are the equivalent of having cigarettes. And so none of them are safe for you. None of them are going to be good for your body. And all of them can have very high levels of nicotine and have that addiction take hold. And then we'll talk a little bit about the evolution of the vapes, and it culminates with the Juul on here. And I know that more products have come out since this presentation was made, and I know that some of the more popular products are like the puff bars and some of the disposables that are really taking hold, and some of the flashier Nick sticks and things like that. But I've left this slide as it is, again, because we don't really want to turn it into an advertisement for the latest and greatest products. And Juul still accounts for about 70% of the market. And so this is, the likely thing of what they're going to be seeing. And I like, equating that Juul is the same as all of this other stuff. And so we'll do that. And then we'll talk about how it is, a little bit more of a newer form, although for a lot of these kids, it's sometimes, now one of the only things that they've maybe been exposed to, because cigarettes aren't as popular and everything has moved into the electronic realm. There's one other typo that I leave on this slide, and I think it's just kind of crazy because at this point in time, when this presentation was created, there were only 7,000 different flavors. And I point this out to the kids. I said, this presentation was made a couple years ago, and on it says there's 7,000 different flavors. I said, but everything has been so popular. How many do you think there are now? And I'll take guesses from the audience and just see what they come up with. And then I'll tell them the real number. I said, now it's actually over 15,500 different flavors. Can you guys believe that it's doubled in the number in just the last few years? Why do you think that would be? And then we go back again to how, that matching game, how they're appealing to kids, how they're making it seem familiar, how they're making it like candy and it seems safe. And we'll talk through some of that, and we'll talk through some of those other kind of strategies. So then we talk just a little bit about how they work, just in the interest of making sure they understand what it is that they're being, kind of exposed to. And we'll talk about, there's a battery, there's an atomizer or something that vaporizes or aerosolizes the liquid. And then we'll talk about the mouthpiece and all of that. And then we get talking into, the more severe kind of consequences or health effects. It's not just water vapor in there. And we'll make mention of some of the chemicals that we know are being found in these e-products. We'll talk about how there's no regulations. It's kind of the wild, wild west out there. There's nobody watching to see what's in. You can mix up whatever you want in your kitchen sink and put whatever you want in at the end of the day, and nobody is going to find you out that you've done something wrong. You can sell these products and not be held accountable for what's inside. There's no testing, there's no regulations. And then I talk about our NDSU study and say how even our own, North Dakota College, NDSU, did a study where they tested all these different products that they bought all around the state, and many, many times the labels did not match what was inside. And you could never do that with some of the products that we buy at the grocery store. How can we do it with this? Pointing out that Juul always contains nicotine is another kind of eye-opener moment. I don't always reference the study, but there was a study that showed 63% of high school students that they surveyed for the study did not know that Juul always had nicotine. And we've come to find out now that Juul can have as much as 2 packs worth of nicotine inside. And again, this is one of those instances where I've left it as 1 pack because that's eye-popping enough in most cases. But I will make mention that as we do more research, we're starting to find out that it's even higher. And so, and then we talk again about how just the other things we don't know because they're not tested or regulated. And that's kind of crazy to think about. So it's safe to eat, but not safe to inhale. And that specifically refers back to some of the chemicals that we know are in vapes. Diacetyl is the one that makes food taste yummy. And we'll talk about how it's typically used in a lot of flavorings. And that's why the flavored vapes are such a problem also, because they have this extra chemical to make it taste even better, smell even better. And it's such a small particle that it gets so deep into your lungs, it can cause a lot of problems. And then we'll talk about popcorn lung and how several decades ago, people were getting sick in a popcorn factory from the aerosolized, buttery flavoring, diacetyl laced chemical. And that was making so many people sick that they actually nicknamed the disease after them, to popcorn lung. And that usually gets like a few kind of wide-eyed moments in class too, because a lot of kids eat popcorn. And then they inevitably, you'll get someone ask, well, is it dangerous to have popcorn? Or, and then you can kind of harken back to, no, it's safe to eat, but it's not safe to our lungs. Things that you put in your mouth isn't necessarily something that you would ever inhale. Propylene glycol, I like to talk about the allergy side of this. A lot of people are allergic to it the same way people are allergic to peanuts or shellfish or strawberries, and I'll list all those things off to kind of try and give them something to relate it to, so it's not such a foreign concept, because there usually are some kids in the room that will have an allergy, even if it's not one of those extreme ones. And we'll talk about, you know, the sore throat, the sinus problems. Some kids will break out on their faces, and you know, kids have a certain amount of vanity, especially when you get to the upper high school ages, and so that's kind of a good thing to talk about with your older kids, especially because they're more susceptible to that anyway, with all the hormones raging and stuff. Bad for our bodies, bad for the environment. Kids actually seem to care a lot about our environment. Our younger generation will hopefully be the ones that save the world for us finally, since we're not saving ourselves just yet. But vape waste and cigarette waste and tobacco waste in general is huge. It's cigarette butts are the most littered item in the world. Billions of butts appear every year all over, and now vape waste is quickly catching up. And what's so horrible about the vape waste is they are very, very toxic. Those little jewel pods and things that get left behind, or the disposable single-use puff bars and things. A lot of times they have, you know, oily residue, nicotine residue. You can have, you know, poisoning happen through touching it. There are sharp edges, so they're a little more dangerous than a cigarette butt. If toddlers or pets are getting a hold of them, they have sometimes broken, sharp edges. And so we can kind of talk through some of this, and it's just another aspect that, you know, it's not maybe all about our bodies, even though that's a lot of what we concentrate on. It's also about the world around us. And youth seem to really resonate with that aspect of it. And then we do talk about the poisoning. That's kind of a nice lead in as you talk about the hazards of the waste, to talk about the poisoning aspect. And we'll talk about how it can occur. I will a lot of times make mention of toddlers and pets as being prime, you know, candidates for getting a hold of this stuff and not understanding to not eat it or drink it or touch it or play with it. And then I will even mention our vice principal in Valley City that had poisoning from taking products away from kids that he had seen in his school, and he didn't know to wash his hands, and he got very, very sick. And so kind of relating it back to them again in a way they can understand. And then we will talk very briefly about explosions, and I'll ask them if anyone remembers when Samsung's, you know, phones were getting taken away a few years ago because they had batteries that were exploding. And usually a few kids will remember that. It's been a little bit less as, you know, the farther removed we get from that, but they'll remember. And then we'll talk about how, well, because there's no regulations on these products, there's no rules in place like we talked about earlier, they don't have to do a recall when their batteries start exploding. And so all those dangerous big battery packs are still out there. Regulation and safety. Oh, this does need to be updated. Sorry, I missed this. Must be 21. North Dakota passed that just this past legislative session. So this slide can get updated now. So must be 21 to purchase. And then we again talk more about how the labeling can be inaccurate, how the stores can legally mix their own things and we don't always know what's in it, and how a lot of the federal regulations or the national regulations are hung up in a lawsuit until at least 2022, although that could get pushed back even farther. And so just let them know that, you know, people are attempting to change these policies and to put rules in place, but it's a long process and we can't count on it happening anytime soon. And so we need to make the good choices for ourselves now. Sometimes we will travel around with these bottles. A lot of times I will just show the picture, but there is a recipe that you can get. Back in the day, I believe Jordan had provided a recipe as part of this presentation. And so we talk about, again, how the only good air to put in your lungs is the smoke-free or tobacco-free air, similar to clean, fresh water. Having cigarettes, it's like having that thick, gross, dirty mixture. Like, who wants to drink that? Who's going to think that that's a good idea? Well, e-cigarettes have less things in them. Maybe, we are not 100% sure. We don't know. But even still, do you really want to take a drink out of that bottle not knowing what's in it? Is it really safer? And then we get into a conversation about how safer does not mean safe. And I really try to hit this home because I think it's easy for youth to to understand and grasp onto, the safer not being safe. If something's 5% safer or 10% safer, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea or a safe thing for you to do. And so then I'll ask the question, and this is a kind of a funny moment to wake them up a little bit again. I'll be like, all right, who here wants to jump off of a 30-story building? And inevitably somebody will say, oh, I would use a parachute, or yeah, I would do it no matter what. And we'll kind of chuckle at them because we know they're not being serious, or at least we hope we aren't. I always kind of say, oh, no, you would not. And then I'll say, all right, I'm going to clarify this. Who would jump off the 30-story building with no parachute or hang glider or whatever you can think of? And nobody will raise their hands, or one or two jokesters will raise their hands. And then I'll say, all right, who here is going to jump off a 10-story building? That's way safer than 30. You're way closer to the ground. Who would do that? And they all look at me a little funny usually and shake their heads. And then I'll say, well, why not? Why wouldn't you do 10 stories instead of 30? And then almost always they'll get it right away and say, well, the result's the same. I said, yeah, no matter what, you go splat. Safer does not mean safe, and kind of take that home. And then here's how we talk about the advocacy piece and the policy piece. And we make mention of some of the things that we work on. The Tobacco 21, we can pat ourselves on the back for, and know that that was enacted this past session and ratified at the state level. We talk about increasing the price of products and tax, and then tobacco-free parks and schools and point of sale and events and fairs and things, and make mention of some of the stuff that we know is effective. And then we'll talk about the holidays that are coming up if they want to get in on something. And the Kick Butt Stay logo probably should come off of this. They did change it to take down Tobacco Day. And so I'll update that before I send this out with Abby too. I missed that one as well. But we'll talk about how there's different ways that they can get involved in activism and give them ideas in their schools and their communities. And again, these last few slides, it all depends on how much time is left. Sometimes you have a really interactive group and they'll ask a lot of questions throughout, and you'll be running short on time when you get to these. But I do still try and show them, even if it's just for a few seconds a piece. And I'll talk about how if they want to be influencers in their schools or communities, or if they want to get involved in some way, we can help them put activities together. We can help them put presentations together or booths together. And that's where we'll talk about, their local public health unit is a great resource for that. Their school counselors, if they've got a SAD chapter, if they want to work directly with Tobacco Free North Dakota, we're there for them too. But I always mention all the local options first, because those are the easiest ones for them to plug into. You can write letters to the editor. We'll talk a little bit about that, unless it's very, very short on time. But we'll tell them that they can, excuse me, have a voice in their community in that realm. We'll talk about going straight to their decision makers or policymakers. I'll make mention of some of the students that have come to the Capitol during legislative session. We'll talk about going in front of city commissions, county commissions, school boards, and talk through just a little bit how they can utilize, again, their local support systems through their schools, their local public health units. Sometimes church groups will be a great outlet for some of this, or Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, things like that, where they're looking for community-based activities, and how we keep it nonpartisan, how we advocate for an idea and not a person necessarily, or things like that. And so we keep it nonpartisan and really talk about the health benefits of policy and how it can really affect a community's health when you can implement things that keep tobacco out of kids' hands. And then using the media, media would much rather talk to youth than people like me, and I'll be very blunt with them about that. If they ever want to be on the radio or TV or help record a PSA, those types of opportunities are available to them, and a lot of times the media is very open to that, or if they're looking for that, be aware that they could be referred to talk to you if you get real passionate about projects in your community around tobacco prevention. And social media. And again, they're the experts in this realm. I tell them that. I said, you guys are the influencers of the future. You guys know how to use these platforms way more effectively than people like me who are older and not having had the privilege of growing up with them. You know, when these things came around, I was in my 20s and 30s in some instances. And so they've always known how to use this stuff. And so they can be really effective and make a difference with people their age. And you can give them some ideas on how to do that. And then, you know, community activism. And again, here's where we'll talk about the Not a Replacement campaigns. The flags are highlighting, you know, litter problems in parks, the bottles full of cigarette butts. So there are a lot of ways that they can, you know, help their environment, help their schools, help their communities. And we'll talk a lot about that. And again, these slides are all dependent on the amount of time that's left. And then again, to learn more, here's who you can reach out to. And then these last two slides are here, but I very, very, very rarely will show them to youth. I keep them here more as a reminder in case a question would come up from the class. If somebody asks about them, then I can pull this up. But I typically don't show these last couple of slides unless there's tons and tons of time left or a question has come up. Okay, so that is the presentation. I am going to pause here for a moment and then we'll go back to it. There we go. I think, can you see me or my screen? Me?
You.
Okay. Awesome. All right, so I'll share screen again in a couple minutes and we'll flip back around to a few more ideas and things. But I just wanted to pause for a minute to see if there are any questions that have come up, just having talked through the presentation part of things. All right, no questions, comments, or thoughts. Are there any comments or thoughts that aren't a question? Okay, well, quiet group, that's okay, taking it all in. So as you can see, that took me about 35 minutes to go through, talking fast and talking with you and not maybe going as in depth or taking questions. And so kind of knowing that it's usually pretty easy to get into a 40 to 45 minute class period. Unless you have a super interactive group, then sometimes you might have to shorten, like I said, those end slides in particular. But this presentation, you can get all the way down into a 25-minute time frame if you skip through some of the activities. And to kind of loop back around to the activity piece of things, a few more ideas if you don't want to play the Find Your Match game. I have adapted that piece and not handed out the cards or not done anything like that. But I've talked about flavorings and flavors. And done a couple other different activities to do that with the kids. A couple of times I split them up into groups of 4, 5, 6 students, depending on how large the class was. And I asked them to come to consensus or make a group decision about their favorite candy bar and their favorite pop. And then I'll give them a minute or two to talk through it, and then we'll go around the room and I'll ask them for their final answers. And it's sometimes kind of funny because they have a hard time agreeing, but that's part of the point. It makes them talk through a lot of different options. And usually we'll get answers like, you know, Mountain Dew and Skittles, peanut butter cups and Diet Coke and things like that. And then I'll ask them, why are we talking about candy and pop in a tobacco presentation? And usually someone will put it together and they'll say, oh, because that's the flavors you can buy. I was like, yeah, well, why are they making candy flavored tobacco products? Why would they want it to be like something that we eat? And we'll talk a lot about how you know, because it makes it seem more normal, it makes it seem more safe, it makes it seem more familiar, it makes it easy for us to know that we're going to like it when we see the package, because we already know that we like Skittles, so we're of course going to like this. And we'll talk about again how that's one of their advertising tactics and marketing tactics to get kids involved, because most adults don't care if their tobacco products taste like, you know, cotton candy or Sour Patch Kids or Diet Coke or Skittles or root beer. And so that's one activity you can play in as little as 2 or 3 minutes, but it gets them up and moving and talking amongst themselves. We'll sometimes do class votes if we have even less time. I'll, just pick 3 or 4 different candies or 3 or 4 different pops, and then I'll have the class raise their hands to vote if it needs to be even super fast. But you can see how you can start to adapt some of those little things. I'm going to get ready to share my screen again here in a second. I'm just gonna get this pulled up. So another great slide that I haven't actually added in yet because I need permission from the slide's author, but it was recently shared, and so some of you might already be using it. But Melissa Markegard in Fargo developed a really great COVID-related slide. So if you wanted to add a slide about COVID and talk about how, during the pandemic, there are even more risks to having a vaping addiction, and how, the hand-to-mouth action can spread germs, sharing vapes can spread germs, weakening your lungs makes it more susceptible to germs, COVID or otherwise. So you could certainly add in a slide about that. And that would be a slide like this. And like I said, Melissa in Fargo made this one, and it's great because it includes the My Life, My Quit and the ND quits information on it. I'll see if I can get permission to tuck that into that youth presentation. Otherwise, we can always, modify our own, but she did create that one. This is an article on the vape waste, and this is where I took some of that information that I did that slide for, and it's a really great article if you want to read through it and get even more ideas on how vape waste could be talked about with kids or otherwise. And then if you have a longer class, or maybe you're invited in multiple times with kids, this is a neat way to get them involved and have it be more interactive. This is called Kahoot. And this is a way that you can do real-time surveys with the class and quizzes. And this can be really fun. And usually if it's an older group, this is a little bit easier to do because they do need either their phones, or if they have tablets or computers in the school, at their desks or at their stations, then they can do this real-time quiz with you. But this does take longer. So this would be if you're coming back, more than once, if you've maybe already given the PowerPoint and want something different to do, because this will eat up, probably a good 15 minutes of time to do a Kahoot type quiz, because you have to give them enough time to answer, and then you're going to want to talk through all the answers at the end. And this I have found through the Stanford Tobacco Prevention Toolkit website. And I know that this is a great curriculum that a lot of health classes will use, and sometimes we will use. And so this is just one thing that I have found that I like, is having the real-time survey option. And this is good, maybe especially if you've gone in year after year and you don't always want to do the same presentation with the same group of kids. Just to help keep it a little bit more fresh. You can do things like that. Okay, so that all being said, I think I'm back on screen, yes? Yes. I just want to talk about a few of the common pitfalls when talking with our youth, and kind of why we talk to them a little bit differently than we talk to adults. And part of it is, again, like I said at the beginning, we don't want to necessarily push them towards products that they are maybe not interested in the first place. And so we'll typically leave out showing off the stealth products, like the hoodie string vapes, or the vapes that look like Sharpie pens. I mean, kids are pretty good at figuring out how to hide stuff on their own, and us directing them to go Google some of this stuff maybe isn't in our best interest when we're trying to keep them from it in the first place. And so I will save those types of slides and those types of examples for our adults when I'm talking to school administration or staff or parents. That's when we really want to highlight those types of things. If you'll notice in the presentation too, it doesn't typically show people doing the act of vaping or smoking. That's purposefully done so that we're not normalizing it or making it seem glamorous in any way. I know sometimes there's a temptation to point out specific advertising on how the industry targets, kids by making these cool ad posters showing, at a party vaping or vaping clouding contests, or, beautiful people enjoying these products. And we show it wanting to point out how terrible this is, or how bad, or how tricky it is, for the kids to see. But sometimes those concepts are lost on them. They can't always connect the dots. And again, that's partially due to that brain development that we talked about earlier. And so we typically don't show the act of doing or using these products, again, because it helps keep that normalization from happening in the first place, and that glamorization that can sometimes happen. We also typically won't go back and show like the olden days advertising, even if we're meaning it for it to be a bad example or something that we don't do anymore, or that we got taken away because of the industry's bad tactics. Those ads were taken down for a reason, and so for us to show them, like having Joe Camel featured, or the Marlboro Man featured, kind of defeats the purpose, because now we're doing that industry work for them by showing it to kids who wouldn't have seen it otherwise. And again, that's part of that denormalization process that the Master Settlement Agreement helped us win back in the 90s. And so in my presentations, I won't use, old time advertising. I won't use current advertising. I won't show a lot of photos of, vape clouds or smoke or things like that. If you see anything, it's usually just a hand. It's never the face action of doing it. And that's all purposefully done to help not put that in front of kids when it's, it's not supposed to be in the first place. The other thing that I like to do as much as I can with kids is again to ask a lot of questions and make it interactive, and talk about how really big tobacco in their outreach and their advertising is trying to manipulate them. They're trying to trick them into addiction, and addiction at that age takes hold harder and faster. It's much more potent in young bodies than in adults, and the industry knows this, and it all kind of harkens back to, if they can get to you before the information gets to you, then they've won. And giving up your money and giving up your time and giving up your body to an addiction is not something that you want to do lightly. And so if you have the chance to think about all the pros and cons of something, and talk about through the pros and cons, then you will likely make a much different decision. And so we'll talk about it in that framework too, if there's enough time, and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons, and there aren't any pros, so that makes it fast. But we'll talk about all the reasons that they might not be thinking about when it's really tempting to try this gummy bear flavored thing being offered to you. Why not just go eat some gummy bears? And then they'll chuckle. And so those are just some of the tips and tricks that I have talked with or talked through with the kids, and how I typically will try to approach it. So at this point, I'm going to pause one more time and see if there are any questions. And if there aren't a lot of questions, we're going to end really early today.
I do have a question for you, though.
Okay.
I know you've talked about some of the different topics that you present, and the very careful images that you present with them. I noticed you mentioned the vape waste and how they're targeted. Are there any other issues that you try and promote to engage the students? Different ways you find that they relate to this subject?
So a couple of things that I have noticed over the years is they do get pretty interested when we start talking about school projects. And that's usually a good opening for me to talk about our youth summits as another way for them to get involved. And so I think them taking ownership resonates, and it really gets the ideas flowing. And so whenever I talk about our youth summits, or having worked with a group to go in front of their city commission, or helping, get testimony or testifiers to the state capitol, and I'll talk about our day at the capitol that we've held. And once in a while, there's some kids in class in the older groups that have done some of those things. And then we can talk a little bit about their experiences in that realm. But things that resonate with kids that I have noticed are whenever you can hearken it back to something that they're personally familiar with. So the sports, the hunting, the if they've known people that have been affected by tobacco use, if they have had any consequences that they've seen happen. And you don't ever want to call, kids out in class or have them start tattling on each other in class. You have to walk a little bit of a fine line in that regard, especially when some of the younger kids don't have a filter yet. So like the 6th and 7th graders, at that beginning, when you ask them, raise your hand if, and they'll be like, my dad smokes, my big brother does vaping, and you don't really want to go down that path too far. And so sometimes you have to walk a little bit of a careful line, but anytime you can personalize it or give them something to think about that they've noticed in their immediate world around them, seems to get them a little bit more interested and invested into what I'm saying. Because sometimes, especially those juniors and seniors in high school, they kind of end up being a little bit bumps on a log. It's almost too late to reach some of them because they know everything already and they don't want to hear it and they've heard it before and they're going to do what they want to do. And so I think just giving as many examples as possible and relating it to things that they themselves might care about. Their time is a big one. Who wants to be taking a 15-minute vape break or a 10-minute vape break, multiple times a day, every day for the rest of your lives? What could you do with all those minutes that you're standing around vaping or smoking? If you didn't have to go do that, if your body wasn't craving you to go do that. And so those older groups especially might resonate more with that, or their money. How many hours do you have to work at Starbucks to make $500? How long does it take you to spend $500 on vapes? Try and help them do some of that math. Try and help them think through some of their real life consequences or real life scenarios. And it helps, I hope, resonate a little bit more with them. That's a good question, Abby. Did that answer what you were asking?
See Brady. Go ahead, Brady.
Hey, Brady.
I was just wondering what you thought, given what you said about juniors, seniors probably being, top end of what you're looking at. Do you guys and Jordan, Melissa and stuff, do you have an idea if you are to contact schools and, say we have a good presentation, we can come in and give you, is there an age or grade that is the best, as kind of a target group, like freshmen, 8th grade? I mean, I know we're looking at everybody, but with this information, is there one grade or a couple grades that we think are best to focus on?
That's a great question, Brady. And from what I've experienced so far the past few years, I feel like the best age to get to are those early years that you just mentioned. So 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, I think, and you could go down into 5th. I know some of us are already going down into 5th, but once they get to that 10th, 11th, 12th grade, it is harder, to get through. They've already been experimenting. They've already been trying these products. I mean, that's happening in junior highs like crazy. We know this. And so I think the earlier we can get to them, the better. And the most interactive classes I've ever had have been 7th and 8th graders. Sometimes 9th graders, but 7th and 8th, they are chatty. I have a hard time getting to the end of the slides with them because they want to talk, they want to share ideas, they want to ask questions, they want to talk about experiences or go through their thought processes. And so I feel like the best shot we have at maybe really influencing the direction our youth might take are those earlier years. So 6th, 7th, 8th grade would be my recommendation. If you can get in to your middle schools and junior high schools, that would be best. That being said, we do want to talk to all the kids 4th through or well, maybe not 4th, but 5th through 12th grades. Because they sometimes will need to hear this information more than once too. I come from a retail background, so many years ago in a previous life, it seems like I was a retail manager. And we used to have to, I mean, aside from selling what was in our store, we would sell, you know, perks and benefits and programs and credit cards and things like that too. And a statistic that I will never forget is, on average, it takes around 7 times of hearing information to have it sink in. And so people would always wonder, well, why are you asking me about signing up for your credit card again? I told you no last time. It's like, well, because we're taught that if we ask you enough times, eventually you'll change your mind and do it, because you'll have had all the information and it will have sunk in and you'll see a benefit to it. And so I think the same thing can be said when we're talking to our kids in particular. Just because some of these concepts are a little bit higher level, they're harder to grasp, they're harder for them to personalize because their brains aren't developed. And so if we can share information in different ways multiple times to them, it will eventually start to sink in a little bit better. And so if you can get in on a year after year basis and start talking to the same kids, just adapting your presentation a little bit each time, but essentially sharing the same good information each time, maybe just in slightly different ways, that's when we'll have the best effect. And so I feel like those early years are our best chance at getting it to sink in. Great question.
Something I actually did just do was I had my youth board go in and present to the 7th graders yesterday.
Awesome.
And it actually went really well. We just did a 20-minute presentation. Abby's daughter was actually part of it. They were divided into groups of 4, my students, and then they presented to groups of it was like 100 to 150 kids at a time.
Mm-hmm.
But it went really well. And yeah, I agree with Heather. The younger, that middle school, like 5th through 7th grade, they're pretty good. 8th graders I've had a hard time with over the last couple of years. They just have an attitude. And even the 7th graders are kind of like that too. So I don't know, I personally have been really liking the 5th grade, 6th grade, and 7th grade. They've been the best as far as attitude and taking in the information, but it was really nice having high schoolers actually talk to the middle school students. They really resonated, and we got a lot of positive feedback from the teachers as well.
I love that idea, having that be a school-based project or a peer-to-peer project. That's awesome, Jordan. Thanks for sharing. I'm so glad to see you on the webinar today. Somewhat of a celebrity in the youth engagement world, just if everyone didn't know that. Great idea. Other comments, other questions, other thoughts?
I'd just follow up on that then. If you're looking at, like Jordan said, have 5th grade, for instance, is there any thought on, or has anybody tried focusing on that area for a first time visit and then trying to get in a couple years later with that same group? So it isn't just a one-time visit, which we know is ideal, but then follow up a year, or probably not a year, but 2, maybe 3 years later, and give similar information, some more age relevant information at that time to hit them better. Has anybody tried that to get better? Bang for buck is not the right way to say it, but to get better response and treat them better.
That's a great question, Brady. And I personally have not been able to repeat with specific students in the short time I've been doing this work. Has anyone else out there know that they've been able to repeat, or do you get invited back year after year to the same school?
Heather, this is Haley from Grand Forks, and we actually had a request from Manville Public Schools a couple of years ago, and obviously before COVID, we're able to go out there and actually do the presentation. And I think I believe we went down to even 4th grade because they were having trouble with even 3rd graders at that time. And now have since, we've been running a vaping awareness campaign, a media campaign, and we think that's generating more calls to schools, which is in turn generating more calls back to us for more presentations. And just with limited capacity, we decided to record our presentation so that they could continue sharing it. And when we talked about that, it basically hasn't changed. There's just some updated slides. They actually preferred that, and that they they actually wanted to repeat the presentation to the kids that had already seen it 2 years ago. So I think that that's probably going to happen, at least in some areas where they're experiencing issues with, confiscation. Basically they're getting caught with them, and they're just trying to increase the number of times the kids are hearing it. So it's just recently happened, but it has happened here in Grand Forks.
Thanks for sharing, Haley. That's good to know, and great idea recording it so it can be shown over and over again too. I love that. And again, it kind of reinforces that idea of, they need to hear it more than once and more than one way. And I think another way to do that is through some of the curriculum that you can find online. There's the Clear the Air, there's the toolkit that I showed today. There's a lot of good curriculum, and if you can get some of your schools or health classes or science classes to partner with you, so that maybe the kids have a whole week's worth of curriculum worked into their school day, and then you come and present at the end of the week and wrap it all up, or vice versa. You kick things off at the start of a week, and then throughout the rest of the week they do some different activities and curriculum based pieces in some of their classes to reinforce what you're seeing. That's a neat partnership that could possibly be made. One of the times I was invited in, it was to a science class, during their health curriculum week. And so I talked to every single class period that day for that specific teacher. And that was kind of neat, because then she did some worksheets and activities with them as a follow-up the next day. And so you could offer up those types of ideas. And with the ready-made curriculum that you can find online, the teachers don't have to do a lot of lesson planning or work in that realm, which they like and makes life a little bit easier for them. And so that would be another way to get them that information repeated over a time period, whether it's a week or year after year through curriculum. And so offering that up as a kind of conduit that you can be to help connect them to those resources, I think is another good way to get into the schools.
Hi, my name is Singer. I'm with Rolette County Public Health, kind of new to the tobacco-free stuff. Judy has kind of stepped out of it, so here with Rolette County. But you talked about getting the kids involved. I've been going out to the St. John's School in our county, and the first day I went for the 7th graders, doing Catch My Breath out there. And the first day that I went, there was 2 girls in the office because they had just been caught vaping in the bathroom. So they've had a lot of issues, but I can tell with like the 7th graders, they were more interactive. The 8th graders went out there on Tuesday, and there were some of them that were just not as receptive, didn't really want to do anything but sit there and make rude comments. And, they really had the attitudes that, we know this, and kind of hearing back maybe some reports that they are using the vapes, and this was just boring information. But the 7th graders were wonderful and did some wonderful things. So, and I'm also going down into the 5th and 6th grade after the holidays. So,
awesome. Well, welcome, Sarah, and thanks for sharing that. That helps us kind of know, again, that age range. That target group might just be that 5 through 7.
But Catch My Breath I'm using, and then there's some stuff from Stanford University out there too, and
Catch My Breath is
action type things. Yep.
And for those that were on the youth work group call, Jordan and some of her team on that call collaborated with the cessation work group and created some amazing resources. So if you haven't participated in either of those groups, maybe reach out to Jordan and see if you can get some of those resources. They did a spreadsheet of all the different youth education curriculums that are out there for us to access and use, and then a spreadsheet of different youth cessation services that can be accessed. Because that is one thing, and I don't talk too much about this part with the kids, but when we talk to adults, we need to make them understand that kids aren't just misbehaving or vaping for the sake of misbehaving. A lot of times they are addicted and they need help, and you can't punish away an addiction by giving them detentions or suspensions or taking sports away. If they're truly addicted, they need help beyond that punishment. And so having some of those resources like the My Life, My Quit, or some of the other ones that were shared on that group call the other day might be good to have in your back pocket. And those aren't public resources. We don't share those out or give them to school. The spreadsheets themselves, we don't share out or give to schools, but you can, cherry pick what's most appropriate off there and then make that connection with whoever you're talking to, whether it's a school principal or a guidance counselor or a parent.
Heather, I will be sending those out to all the coordinators. I just wanted to go through and proof them one more time and make sure they're ready to go. So we will be sharing those because the youth work group did some great work on those resources. And again, internal resources for your reference.
Fantastic. I should have known that they would go to everybody already. Yeah, I can't overstate enough how much I learned on that call on Monday, and the amount of work that went into putting those together is just amazing. And so be very appreciative when you get them because they're fantastic. Other thoughts, other questions, other examples or things that you've noticed in your schools or communities, anything and everything. We kind of have a little bit of an open forum for this last bit of time, and then we will end early. And I won't keep you here for the sake of keeping you here, that's for sure.
I will just mention, Steve put in the chat, they're providing their PowerPoints to the school resource officers to share, and it looks like Jordan does that as well in his notes.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a good point to bring up. There is another ally we have in our corner, and that's the school resource officer. And I know not all schools might have them or have real active ones, but some of you that do, make sure that you loop them in on the things that you're doing, let them know when you're giving presentations, invite them in to present alongside you or with you or instead of you. Again, doubling up on the number of people accessing the same group of kids over and over with the same information is a good thing, and those school resource officers can be really amazing in that regard. Thanks for bringing that up. All right. Speak now, forever hold your peace. Just kidding. You can contact me whenever.
I think I heard somebody. Is there one?
Is there a place where all the different PowerPoints that people use, or the one that you just showed, Heather, that we can access?
I know it used to be housed in the resource section of your BreatheND backend. Abby, I think that they're still there. Maybe not my most updated one, which I can give to you today. And I know I've personally shared it out a few different times, but Abby, maybe you have a better answer than this for me. Is that presentation backend still there?
They're on the private tobacco website with the login, and they have been there, and we can update with the current version to that site so that everyone has access to that.
So I'll send Abby everything that I've shown today, and then that one, excuse me, matching game that I didn't get pulled up. I'll send all of that to Abby after we disconnect today so that she can put the most current pieces up there for you guys. And then if there are more things requested or needed after the fact, or that you want help building out, I'm happy to do so. And then we would of course share that with everybody when it was finished.
Do you want to pop your email in the chat so people have that in case you don't have that?
Great idea.
There aren't any further questions. I will just put in a plug for our next event in the series on December 16th. On that original email had the save the dates of our monthly series. So December 16th, we will have Andrew from Tobacco Free North Dakota doing some media presentation for social media tips, different ways to engage and maximize those opportunities. So more information and will be forthcoming. Same thing, you'll need to reply to me to get the link because that's how we've got it set up. This recording will be saved. I believe it will be going to TFND for their resource page to access that. So if you have people who didn't get this information, we will do our best to share that and get that out. So any other questions before we wrap this up? Hearing none, thank you so much for your time today. And
thank you. I appreciate everyone spending the time with us this morning. You guys are the boots on the ground and the experts in the field when the communities really need it. And so I just appreciate all of you, and I've learned so much from all of you. And I love that you gave me the time to share what I've been doing and to talk through some new ideas. So thanks, and have a great holiday coming up with Thanksgiving. And hopefully we see you all in December on the 16th for Andrew's presentation.
Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Heather.